types of decks that you want to play against when you're the Dimir Rogue decks are exactly Temur Adventures and the Sultai Ultimatum decks. You want to play against kind of slower decks that aren't really pressuring your life total. Where the deck really struggles are the aggressive strategies in the format, maybe mono white aggro and mono red aggro, and also decks that may be prepared with a bunch of escape cards in the sideboard. But in general, I think he's quite happy with how everything broke down. He got paired against Sultai Ultimatum in the last round, and now going up against Temur Adventures again.
This has been a bit of a breakout run here for Arne, who has had a successful professional level career up until this point, particularly at the Grand Prix level, with a total of 7 top 8s, including a victory at Rimini. So, you know, that's an impressive resume already for Arne, especially when you consider that over the course of the last, say, 12 months, 13 months or so, there haven't been any opportunities for him to shine at that GP level. So, you know, really a great run from him career-wise, but now it's really starting to feel like, you know, he's going to burst onto the higher level pro scene here at the Kaldheim Championship with this 8-0 run so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, he said it himself that he's really happy with the matchups that he's looking to face at the top tables. So, you know, gonna just continue trying to farm all these top level pros.
That's what he said. Yeah, he said he really just didn't want to face off against mono red, particularly. That's the matchup that he dreads the most. Of course, when you play Dimir Rogues and you fill up your opponent's graveyard and they can play cards that have escape, you all of a sudden are basically putting cards into their hand for them, and that's not something you want to do really ever, particularly against a deck like mono red that can close the game on you quite quickly. So, but he seems to be dodging it as, again, the people at the top tables, he took a quick look at how the standard metagame broke down for day 2, and there just really wasn't much in the way of mono red. So he's feeling really good about his position here. And, you know, I'll remind you, he's 8-0 right now. If he can get to 12 wins under any circumstance, that's going to lock up a top 8. No tiebreaker nonsense, no sweating it out. Just boom, you're in once you hit number 12. And boy, another win here would move him a critical step further. On the other side, though, Javier at 7-1, well, he's been here before. You know, this is not his breakout tournament. He's had multiple of those, you know, over the course of the past 3-4 years, and has solidified himself as one of the game's elite players. So it's business as usual for Javier Dominguez. He's 7-1, and he's looking to just keep cruising here.
Yeah, and if you notice with Javier's list, you know, some slight modifications that he chose to go for with his deck. You see a Shadow Spear here in the main, particularly good against aggressive decks, not so much here, especially good against the mono-white aggressive decks that have lots of indestructible creatures. And what their team actually has chosen to do is just not play Alrund's Epiphany altogether, and are just playing a smattering of some different cards here. There are Shadow Spear being one of them. Additionally, 1 copy of Jaspera Sentinel in his deck.
Oh.
So, yeah, a couple of interesting decisions here. But, you know, at the end of the day, still just your mostly your typical Temur Adventures package. Now, Arne, the one thing with his hand is, you know, we've seen him come off to some pretty quick starts against these slower control decks, you know, building his opponent's graveyards pretty quickly. That's not the case here, right? He only had the Merfolk Windrobber, and it was immediately killed. So it's going to take some time for him to be able to actually get the cost reduction from that into the story that he really, really wants.
Not a lot of action here on the game so far, Paul, as the players have been kind of jockeying for position. You see the Lurrus of the Dream Den into hand here for Huschenbeth, and on the other side, Javier, you know, the Shadow Spear is the only thing he's actually done thus far outside of just hitting his lands, which is another which Arne is also doing here. So I guess they're both just kind of waiting for each other to blink, and then they're going to go for it. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, and I feel like in games like this, you have to favor the deck that's got the cheaper threats that you can play at instant speed, right? And that's what the Dimir Rogues has. At any point when he draws something like a Soaring Thought Thief or a Thieves Guild Enforcer, all of a sudden that puts the pressure on Javier to respond. In addition, you know, you're playing a deck with 4 copies of Drown in the Lock, and that's an extremely efficient counterspell that you can use to answer a variety of different threats. So, I mean, I feel like as the games go longer, you know, and Javier hasn't really put any pressure here, I gotta like Arne's side.
Yeah, he's also managed to keep hitting his land drops here. He's really done nothing to put his own game plan forward outside of taking out that giant, but he's top deck lands on the last 2 turns. Now we see that he finally has ran out. The good news is that's card number 7 going into hand. He won't have to discard or start to play things out prematurely. But that is something to keep an eye on as well, is that if the players want to play this staring contest game, you know, sometimes you're kind of forced to blink if you can't hit your land drop. Also, could we just see a full priced into the story? Is that even... They never do that, right?
Yeah, the thing is Javier Dominguez's deck is packing multiple counterspells. So,
I see.
When you
no
play
way.
a 7-man into the story, it's going to be very unlikely that you're going to be able to protect it with counter magic.
Right.
But, you know, the thing is his hand is already loaded. I think he's just going to kind of wait to see if he can back it up with a couple of those Drown in the Locks that he has.
Yeah, so he's finally going to get some forward momentum here as far as getting cards into the graveyard of Javier Dominguez, which can start to unlock Drown in the Lock as well as into the story. And we'll see how this Soaring Thought Thief can get the job done, as we saw another missed land drop here for Arne. But it was another copy of Into the Story, you know, perhaps the most powerful spell in the deck. And yeah, he probably isn't going to be too sad to see that, particularly since the Soaring Thought Thief actually got to attack here and get that mill train rolling.
And now Javier deciding whether or not he wants to kind of run out this Brazen Borrower. It does present a potential creature to trade with the Soaring Thought Thief. You could also play it and then attach the Shadow Spear onto it. And if you do, then all of a sudden your creature's a 4/2, which would then brick wall the Soaring Thought Thief, assuming Arne doesn't have a removal spell.
You know, the other thing is the Yespera Sentinel in hand has reach. It's kind of you can do similar stuff where it can actually be a blocker in this matchup.
Yeah. Although I will say Arne is not really super concerned about the actual damage that he's dealing with the Soaring Thought Thief. It is more about just filling up Javier's graveyard,
right,
so he can get those into the stories online. And as you can see there, Javier going for the bounce end of turn, the Petty Theft on the Brazen Borrower, that would have put 8 cards in Arne's hand. So Arne opting to just cast the Soaring Thought Thief immediately at the end of his turn, which does mean that will tie up 2 of Arne's mana on Javier's turn. So,
and we're going to see that that Arne is willing to fight over the 3/1 flyer there. He's going to fire off a Mystical Dispute, and as you said, we're starting to see how this plays out here, Paul, with the cheaper cards in the hands of Arne Huschenbeth. He was able to replay Soaring Thought Thief and counter the opposing threat, and he still has 4 mana available for whatever Javier tries to come up with on his turn. So lots of flexibility there for Arne.
yeah, and really, really important here is that he got the 7th card in Javier's graveyard. Those Into the Stories are now online. He can cast them for 4 mana.
And look at this, a big play here from Javier. He leads with Lovestruck Beast straight up and then goes for the Great Henge, putting it on the stack. Now he's left himself a Mystical Dispute as a backup. This may take double Drown in the Lock here, though, from Arne.
Well, the thing is, there's not enough cards in the graveyard yet to counter the Great Henge. There's only 7.
Right.
So even if he uses Drown in the Lock here to kill the Lovestruck Beast, he might just be 1 short. And even if he does use double Drown in the Lock to kill Lovestruck Beast and counter the Great Henge, Javier still has a mana up to Mystical Dispute back the 2nd Drown in the Lock.
Nice setup here from Javier.
This is what Javier needs to kind of get back into this. This is his way of kind of getting ahead on cards. Arne has the Into the Stories, but if Great Henge resolves, the Fairies, the Rogues deck doesn't have a lot of ways to get it off the battlefield, right? Arne's list is not playing cards like Brazen Borrower to get it off the battlefield. And
Paul, you're showing your age here.
I am. Oh, no.
It is an apt comparison, though. So this is actually really beautiful here from Javier Dominguez. He now gets to use one of his Mystical Disputes to counter an Into the Story, one of the more powerful cards, and his Great Henge resolves into Yespera Sentinel. That worked out absolutely beautifully for Javier, and there was a big payoff there for his long setup.
Yeah, so now you might see Arne being a little more aggressive at just using the Drown in the Lock as a counter spell if Javier ever chooses to play creatures, because the Great Henge triggers once a creature enters a battlefield. So by countering the creatures, Javier would not be able to draw the cards.
Look at this, a main phase now into the story here from Arne, who is now really desperate. I mean, getting the Great Henge on the battlefield's a major issue here for Arne, as Javier can sort of take the gloves off and just start casting creature after creature, and he can actually keep up on cards now, thanks to the Great Henge.
Right, and Javier has 2 counterspells to back that up too. He's got the Mystical Dispute and the Saw It Coming, and this is a really, really big turn because Arne chose to go with the main phase into the story here, so his mana is tied up. So that Mystical Dispute, where at this point in the game you might think it's not all that useful, this is the window. This is the turn where that Mystical Dispute could do a lot of work.
So down to 2 mana available here for Arne as he passes the turn back over to Javier, who's going to kick things off with Goldspan Dragon.
And it looks like Arne is going to just choose to just try to fight through these counter spells. He knows that card that's been foretold is not an Alrund's Epiphany because Javier doesn't play any copies in his deck. So he knows that it's exactly Saw It Coming.
And he just figures, I just need to brute force it here. Again, going back to when Javier was able to counter the end of the story, that's where these things start to flesh out, right? Is that Arne only has so many resources available, and you see the head shake from him. I think he's thinking about that turn 2 turns ago where Javier ended up on all metrics, right? He ended up with the Great Henge, with an additional creature, and countering into the story from Arne. It was really a disastrous turn for him.
Yeah, and this is huge. So now Javier can also go Crag Crown Pathway. He can play Obosh and still have mana for Saw It Coming.
This one looks like it's fallen apart.
In addition, you see those 2 Heartless Acts that Arne has in hand? Those don't do anything. The Great Henge puts +1/+1 counters on the creatures, so he can't even use them as ways to deal with those giant creatures that Javier has on his side. If he wants to get him off the battlefield, he's gonna have to fire off those Drown in the Locks.
It's really a nightmare here from Arne's perspective. It looked like he was set up to battle well, but Javier Dominguez just outmaneuvered him, plain and simple. We're used to seeing great plays from Javier. This is just another example of that. This is top level play. So both Soaring Thought Thieves enter combat here. They are going to get through to get in for 6, but Javier's at a healthy 22, so he's only going to drop down to 16. Now there are cards going into the graveyard pretty quickly here on Javier's side. I wonder if there's an avenue to victory for Arne there.
The nice thing here, at least, is that Javier currently doesn't have a creature in hand. So, if Javier chooses, or not chooses, but if Javier doesn't find any creatures here, that, he does have the answers to the 2 creatures that are currently in play. So he's going to need to find something to continue getting that value train going off the Great Henge that he has in play. One also notable thing here is that the Shadow Spear gives trample.
Yep.
So Javier can choose to put Shadow Spear on his Goldspan Dragon here, right? So you can't even go with the chump block on the Merfolk Wind Robber to sack and draw a card because you'll just trample through. And with Obosh, that means that's 12 damage coming through. And if Arne does have a removal spell, you will at least get a treasure here from that Goldspan Dragon to give you a little extra mana to play with.
We saw Javier cycle away a Triumph there. He did find Kazandu Mammoth, which, well, look, any creature at this point is what he wants to see, as the Great Henge will help him continue to draw more and more spells. Let's see what he hits off of this.
And I wonder if Arne just needs to let this resolve, and with the Great Henge trigger on the stack, just go for an Heartless Act to just kill the Kazandu Mammoth.
That does seem reasonable.
It looks like he's just choosing to keep up the Drown of the Locks here instead.
Okay. Okay, there goes Shadow Spear onto the Goldspan Dragon.
Yeah, and before attacks, and this is a good timing here on Drown in the Lock. You want to make sure that Javier can't move the Shadow Spear over onto the Obosh. So waiting until the combat step to go for the Drown in the Lock on the Goldspan Dragon. And now we're going to see if Javier wants to fight this. I imagine that he will. I mean, we're talking about a 12-6 effective Goldspan Dragon here. So we're going to see a little bit of fireworks. But keep in mind, Javier doesn't have a lot of mana available to him here. I think he can only... He can use 2 of the 3 counterspells that he has here. Oh, excuse me. There's a treasure in play, so he can actually cast all 3.
Okay.
So,
and he's
so
gonna get another here.
given that, I mean, this is going to resolve. I mean, this Goldspan Dragon attack is going to happen. Now, it's not a lethal attack, but it's going to get Arne down very, very low.
Right. This is going to put Arne in a desperate situation now, as this dragon is just throwing treasure all over the battlefield, and that's allowing Javier to protect it.
Yeah, and that extra copy of Saw It Coming was a huge, huge draw here from Javier. He was sitting on the Saw It Coming that was foretold along with the Mystical Dispute, and finding this extra hard counter means that he's going to be able to get it for a lot here.
And we see Javier sacrificing those treasures to get the mana needed to counter Drown in the Lock.
So once the dust completely settles here, we're going to see Obosh and Goldspan Dragon attack. Merfolk Windrobber is going to block the Obosh, draw a card, and Arne will be down to 1 life from this Goldspan Dragon because that's 6 coming in. And then, of course, Obosh doubles the damage dealt by anything with odd converted mana costs. Yep.
And you see Arne go, yep.
Yep,
This
all right.
is plenty.
So he's not dead, but he's going to be at 1.
Okay, in comes Goldspan Dragon, in comes Obosh.
Yeah, and the Great Henge just doing so much work here. That counter was so big. Putting the counters on those creatures, stranding those Heartless Acts. I mean, he has the option of removing a counter.
Yeah, I was going to say that. But it doesn't feel like being at 3 or being at 1 is really that different, does it?
The only difference is a Bone Crusher Giant. You can get stomped to death now you're at 1 life.
Okay.
But might still be valuable to keep that Heartless Act for something else. Now, he did have a window earlier to kill the Kazandu Mammoth, but I think he wanted to play around Mystical Dispute. He wanted to play around specifically Saw It Coming plus Mystical Dispute, and he did. But the problem was Javier drew exactly Saw It Coming off the Enter the Battlefield trigger from the Kazandu Mammoth.
Well, it was Agadim's Awakening off the top of the library. Arne with a quick look at his graveyard to see if there's any way he can rebuild. But boy, the trample lifelink flying haste dragon that's getting its damage output doubled, it's a problem. That is a very, very large problem.
Yeah. And this all goes down to just Javier knowing exactly kind of when he needed to kind of pull the trigger and make a play, right? He knew that the way that he wins this game is by resolving that Great Henge. He was very aware of the number of cards in his graveyard as well. So that turn where he went hard cast Lovestruck Beast, he didn't even make a 1/1, just hard cast Lovestruck Beast immediately into the Great Henge. And Arne did not have enough cards to actually counter the Great Henge was huge. So Arne, thinking back to that turn, probably should have just countered the Lovestruck Beast, right? If you countered because if you kill the Lovestruck Beast, you don't have a window to prevent that cost reduction of the Great Henge from happening. So he might be looking back at this and going, man, I really should have just countered this Lovestruck Beast because the way I lose here is if Javier resolves Great Henge this turn.
This is interesting now. He played Lurrus into Merfolk Windrobber, but he is in a precarious position to say the least. Currently, the Lovestruck Beast is stuck at home, but the Kazandu Mammoth can attack. There's even a land off the top here for Dominguez, so it'll get the landfall trigger. Anything's lethal. Just a single point needs to come through. And Javier is in the tank. Double block the dragon.
Man, that random Shadow Spear too.
Uh-huh.
Because if he didn't have this random Shadow Spear, Arne could just indefinitely block with this Merfolk Wind Robber, right? And just continue cycling, drawing a card, and try to grind out Javier by using the card advantage he gets from this Lurrus. But because of the fact that this Goldspan Dragon tramples, I mean, it feels to me, I mean, I don't think Arne just has a way around it here. This is just 12 trample damage coming in, and Arne has nothing.
Okay, well, everybody's coming into the red zone here.
So he can gain 3 life by blocking with Lurrus. That'll put him up to 4. But even and then he needs to put one of the creatures on the Kazando Mammoth because that's 12.
Right.
So if he goes Soaring Thought Thief plus Merfolk Wind Robber onto the dragon, that's only 4 toughness, meaning he's going to take 8. And even if he gains 3 life here off the Lurrus, that'll put him down to 4. Additionally, he can remove a +1/+1 counter.
Twice?
But that would put him to 6. So that would be, excuse me, that would still be lethal. So.
Also, it's worth noting here that if it does come down to the second Heartless Act removing another counter, Dominguez does have Mystical Dispute.
Right.
Which,
okay,
which
so I
is
suppose
enough to counter the second.
He can go double Soaring Thought Thief on the Goldspan Dragon. Right. That I think would work out. So you go double Soaring Thought Thief on the Dragon, Lurrus on Obosh, Merfolk Wind Robber on the Mammoth. You remove a counter.
Math is hard. Arne is like, can I survive this?
Oh, excuse me. What? This is a line that yeah, of course you could consider it. It's remove a counter and then kill. However, Javier does have the Mystical Dispute. So
that's right. Again, we're playing with perfect information here, and that's the problem, is that Javier has Mystical Dispute, and that means that the second Heartless Act will not be resolving here, as Javier has the ability to simply counter it. And if he does, he's presenting lethal. 6 damage, he'll be back up to 4. But it's enough to get the job done, and Arne says, okay, you got me. But, you know, looking back, look at Javier Dominguez. He was in intense mode. He's got the hoodie up, and he was deep in the tank. He knows how close that game actually was. But, Paul, we have to go back 5-6 turns. That turn where Javier made that play of just simply playing out the Lovestruck Beast to enable the Great Henge, that ended up winning them the game.
Yeah, and, you know, the kind of the complexion of the game just changed from there. And that entire time, you saw Arne kind of shaking his head a bit. And I think it all just stems from that turn, right? It really goes back to just, well, I mean, when somebody just plays out a Lovestruck Beast, you're like, well, I don't really care about this. I can kill it. It's like, well, no, this is a setup, right? If this resolves, then I get to resolve this henge, and all of a sudden you're in a lot of trouble. So the thing is, he just needed the one turn, right? Because if he countered that Lovestruck Beast, Javier didn't really have a great follow-up, and then on the next turn, all of a sudden, your entire hand is unlocked, right? And you're not even concerned about the Great Henge because you can attack with the Soaring Thought Thief, and all of a sudden, that's 10 cards in Javier Dominguez's graveyard after you countered the Lovestruck Beast, and now your Drowned Luck can actually counter the Great Henge.
Yeah, I think that was the inflection point for the game, is Lovestruck Beast goes on the stack. What are the implications of this, right? Because at first glance, you're like, well, you don't even have a 1/1. Like, you know, I don't really care about the beast itself. It's what does it enable, right? And, you know, this is I'm sure Arne was aware of this, but, you know, for people that are still learning, you know, that's a really good time to go, this is a little bit of a weird play. What could it mean? My opponent is I mean, in this case, my opponent's, you know, former world champion, but, you know, in any game of Magic, your opponent's doing things for a reason for the most part. So you have to really say, well, if they were going to do that, what could it be? And you'd probably come to, well, they probably want to get a Great Henge going. But I've got 6-7 cards in hand and a bunch of mana to work with. Why would they do that if they couldn't protect it? If they didn't have
Yeah.
a plan for the things that I'm
There
going to
is
have?
definitely a plan, and the
Yeah.
plan was the Great Henge. And perhaps if Arne took a second to realize this, it's like Javier's not just going to play a random 5/5 here onto the board for no reason, right?
Right.
Like that doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't he make a 1/1? You know what I mean?
Right.
Because he needed exactly enough mana to be able to go Lovestruck Beast, cast Great Henge, and have Mystical Dispute backup. That's what he
right.
set up.
And
And
you
now
know,
things are going to get a lot tougher here for Arne because game one is where he has the biggest edge. After sideboard, Javier then gets to bring in multiple copies of Ox of Agonis, which now means that if he gets milled, he actually has a way to fight that with those escape cards.
here's Rune Crab to kick things off, so we could see this mill plan really become a thing if that Rune Crab's going to sit on the battlefield for a while. Oh yeah, get in there, Arne. Okay, he decided not to attack with it, although he almost did. There's also a Thieves Guild Enforcer in hand, and you know, if you can combine that, say, with another rogue, the mill plan really does go quickly and kind of demands answers. So the question becomes, does Javier have those answers? And it looks like, yeah, he kind of does. He's in a good position here.
And I like that patience here from Arne. Whenever your opponent passes with a Mountain Up with 2 mana, well, guess what your opponent can probably have? It's Bone Crusher Giant, right?
right.
So maybe just wait, play patient, make it so that your opponent actually doesn't have anything effective to do with their mana this turn, because maybe you can wait for a better opportunity later.
Here's Brazen Borrower now from Dominguez. Now this is certainly would be a tempting thing to counter if Arne had a way to do so, as it was Petty Theft that was cast, and if you counter it, the whole thing goes to the bin. But Arne said, sure.
Javier really wanted a green source potentially. Oh no, he did have one hiding. Okay.
He's going to put Clothis, God of Destiny, on the stack. That's going to get immediately hit by an Essence Scatter, and there's even a nice follow-up here, Thieves Guild Enforcer, to end the turn. So Arne able to use up all of his mana that turn, and a land off the top means he can go Crab into Landfall trigger. This is getting kind of interesting here, Paul.
Yeah, definitely. Just maximizing all the mana here. I mean, really big swing, and now you know this is putting a good deal of pressure here on Javier Dominguez.
And we're going to see, well, mana spent here for Dominguez, but the end result on board is just a 1/1 token. There's another land off the top of the library, and you know, honestly, Arne wants to keep hitting these land drops, get this Rune Crab rolling.
Yeah, and as you can see, Javier not going for the stomp here because Arne spent last turn putting that Lurrus into his hand. So would not really be an effective play because Arne can simply just follow up this turn with Lurrus into the Thieves Guild Enforcer.
Right, and that's also why Arne just declines to cast the Lurrus from his hand. He's just like, well, I'm going to cast it when I can get some value out of the thing. So yeah, fair magic here for Dominguez.
Right, and the thing is, I mean, Javier's not super concerned here with actually dying on damage, right? He just has enough ways to probably keep that at bay. The thing that he should be really concerned about is just kind of getting milled out and maybe just trying to put some permanence on his side of the board and put some pressure on Arne.
Wow, this draw has been beautiful here for Arne Huschenbeth. He's now just drawn an into the story off the top of the library. That's after chaining a few lands together. And things looking pretty decent here for Arne. Let's see how it goes going forward. We see a pretty stacked hand here, though, for Javier Dominguez with multiple counterspells, Brazen Bar, Bone Crusher Giant. There's an Ox over there, too. So he's got a lot of stuff to do as well.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations where you're maybe thinking, oh, I got this into the story. Should I cast it now? Does my opponent have Mystical Dispute? He's hoping. He's praying. And he's going to get some bad news.
Yes.
The thing is, I think he was thinking to himself, was like, you know what? This might be my best opportunity to go for this. He saw the number of Mystical Disputes that Javier had in Graveyard. If you saw him flash over, there were already 2 that hit the bin, right? So there were 2 Mystical Disputes already in the graveyard. You know that there's a Sod coming that's been foretold. So maybe this is the best window. Because if he does resolve that into the story, all of a sudden, I mean, he's looking really good here.
Right. Now, as it stands, he's going to have to fight. He's going to have to scrap it out. That might have been the card that put Arne in the lead. It didn't end up being that way. Thieves Guild Enforcer is going to trade here for the Love Struck Beast. And this is probably just an attempt by Arne here to try to get some value from Luris, I would assume.
Right, but now that he knows that the Saw It Coming is foretold, he's probably not going to go for it. And actually, Arne is just kind of out of gas here.
In Rune Crab we trust, Paul.
Yeah. I mean, that's what he's got to go for. We're probably going to see Javier go for a Brazen Bower here end of turn. And honestly, Javier just really wants to just counter anything and kill anything so that he can just hardcast that Ox of Agonis he has in hand.
That's right. Empty out the hand, although he looks like he decided just to do nothing.
Oh, he didn't have a second blue source.
Oh, okay. Awkward. Well, he has one now. This is a cheeky little attack here from Dominguez as Bone Crusher Giant, Stomp always looming, not only in this matchup and standard in general, and it's gonna get in there. Ooh, and into the story here though for Arne Huschenbeth could be what he needs.
I think this might be a good turn to try to bait a counter potentially. He could go Luris, get that countered, and then run out into the story. Oh, nope. This makes even more sense. Of course.
This is beautiful. Look at this from Arne. He's been carefully tracking the number of blue sources that Javier has access to and putting Brazen Borrow on the stack, tapped him out of blue. And he's like, yeah, baby, now I know I can resolve into this story. And that could put him over the top in this game.
Yeah, that was huge here for Arne. Now he's right back in it. Looks like he drew 3 spells there.
Wow. Including, by the way, he has a Fabled Passage as well. This Rune Crab plan could really be a thing. The straight up mill plan. I mean, he's got another Thieves Guild Enforcer. He could go for Luris plus another of those. Boy, that worked out beautifully for Arne. He's just like, please tap out of that blue mana. And then Javier said, okay. And boom, the window was open into the story resolved.
And at this point, Javier doing some damage control here, realizing that this next turn could be really, really brutal for him, right? And foretelling a second Saw It Coming here so that Luris does not resolve.
Okay, there's Thief Guild Enforcer back on the battlefield doing the mill thing. Arne has to make a decision between Fabled Passage for the double trigger on Rune Crab or just get a temple to keep the good spells flowing. First things first, though, Thieves Guild Enforcer. Down to 11 goes Dominguez. Again, his life total doesn't seem to be under real threat just yet, but he has got him down to 11, and you never know. A couple of flyers can change that pretty quickly. He's going to go for the Temple of Deceit here. So first Rune Crab trigger.
Yeah, and things still not that bad. I mean, it really depends how many cards Javier still has left in library. I think with that little pan over, we saw 28 cards in his graveyard.
That's right.
But, he's successfully kind of emptied out his hand here.
Should have around 21 cards left in the... 20 cards probably left in his library.
Right. And now I wonder if we're going to see a stump here.
Would not be surprised, though it does look like first the Bone Crusher Giant that was on an adventure is going to go on the stack.
Yeah, if that's the case, I imagine Javier is just going to leave up Double Saw It Coming. Or maybe not.
Well, I'm curious how worried he is about this Rune Crab plan, right? It's kind of hard to say. He so far has been able to, for the most part, ignore it. The plan doesn't really matter until it matters, right? Like you can, mill. Who cares? But then all of a sudden, this deck can throw an explosive, like where they go Rune Crab Fabled Passage, and you're like, oh no, and your library just disintegrates in front of you.
And Arne currently doesn't have any counterspells, right? That meaningfully interact with the Saw It Coming. So if Javier just does counter something, Arne can't really fight back.
Arne's just going to continue to use Cling to Dust to help generate an advantage now, looking for some counterspell or another way to interact. Plus, again, another Rune Crab or cards like that could kind of turbo mill here for Arne Huschenbeth. Well, it's going to be another Cling to Dust. I guess he could just cast that now if he wants.
Yeah, just keep looking for more Into the Stories, which would be big, or a Crab. Oh,
Oh, there we go. Drown in the lock off the top of the library. And that allows a window here for him
that
to
was
go
big.
Lurrus and protect it, as he
Yeah,
knows that there's a
that was
saw
a
it coming.
huge draw.
Wow. So now Drown in the Lock's going to counter saw it coming. That's going to let Lurrus hit the battlefield and open up the possibility for a Thieves Guild Enforcer right here, right now. And finally, there's an Ox of Agonis into the graveyard there. But you see Cling to Dust sort of looming around as you see Arne say, where is that Ox? There it is. Let's get that out of here.
Yeah, and now he has the Disdainful Stroke for the first Ox. And curious to see what Javier is going to go for here. That was a huge turnaround. Javier can still potentially come back here. He's going to have to get that Lurrus off the battlefield. So no matter what happens here, we're going to see a stomp on the Lurrus. And my guess is you're just going to see a stomp on the Lurrus, play Kazandu Mammoth, and then just run out an Ox.
It's time to take the gloves off for Javier Dominguez and just start throwing stuff on the stack, huh? Does feel like it.
I mean, I suppose he could just run out a Bone Crusher here instead if he's concerned about Disdainful Stroke. But also, if this Ox gets countered, it's really unfortunate, as Arne has access to Cling to Dust. Although I'm not sure how many cards he has in his graveyard. I'm not sure he has enough.
He has been pretty aggressive about escaping Cling to Dust.
Yeah.
The Fabled Passage will put another land in there if it's close. Boy, these players are giving us a heck of a match here, Paul. This is our first match of the day in the booth, and it has been a treat.
Yeah, so we got the Fabled Passage. There's also the Disdainful Stroke, right? Which would have put an additional card in there as well.
True. Well, as it stands, Ox of Agonis resolves, finds an Innkeeper of Forest and a Lovestruck Beast there for Dominguez.
Yeah, and at this point, I mean, Dominguez is kind of on a clock. Is there no... Oh, he has plenty of lands. Okay, so now, I mean, Dominguez is on a clock, and he's going to just deploy everything that he has, and his hand is really good with that, right? I mean, he's got Edgewall Innkeeper. He could run that out, play the Bone Crusher Giant. I mean, if anything, maybe he might not even want to draw cards.
Funny. You never want to get to that point, Paul. That is...
Oh, yeah. That is not a life that I want to live.
No. But, you do what you got to do, but boy, once you start looking at card draw as a negative, you know you've made a misstep somewhere in life.
Okay,
wow, another Enforcer. This is adding up very quickly.
I mean, if you mill so many cards, your opponents might not even want to escape an Ox.
True. Boy, that's nice. Yeah. There's Eliminate to take out the Bone Crusher Giant. And Arne can pass the turn back with exactly Disdainful Stroke mana available. Very cool, by the way. Arne, let that Ox resolve last turn, and I think he's like, hey, you're helping my plan. Like that's not going to kill me. If you want to get 3 more cards out of that library, I'm with you. Now, it does put a lot of pressure on Disdainful Stroke to be able to counter something relevant. But he's been able to manage the board thus far.
Yeah, I mean, Arne is at 11, right? And he just took 4. And look, Javier is not going with Edgewall Innkeeper. He's just going to go Bone Crusher.
Oh, my God.
Make a 1/1.
I'm so sorry, Javier. When you're playing the Adventures deck and you play your Edgewall Innkeeper after your Bone Crusher Giant and Lovestruck Beast in the same turn. That's just where we're at.
Right.
And let's see, did he get him?
He's got him.
He got him. All the cards are gone, and Arne Huschenbeth has found the victory via mill. Now, it is a very reliable and solid backup win condition. Most of the games that end from Dimir Rogues do end up through damage, but you can absolutely pivot, especially that crab went the distance. It never died, right? It got returned to hand once, immediately hit the battlefield again, and it just was land drop after land drop for that whole game. And Arne has evened things up at 1 game apiece, Paul.
Yeah. And for this game, the pivotal moment was when Javier went for the Brazen Bower, right? The turn he went for the Brazen Bower, that's when Arne realizing that Javier is going to probably look to put some pressure on because that crab was on the battlefield, was like, look, well, I'm going to cast this at instant speed. The problem was that left the window open for Into the Story to resolve, and that gave Arne just enough resources to be able to mill Javier out.
Arne with a quick break there. He does have somewhere in the 9 minute range left on his game clock when we actually get back to the match. Unlikely to be a particularly important issue, but look at this. Back to the match goes Arne Huschenbeth, and what he's doing is he got a chance to mill out his opponent effectively entirely, right? He saw basically every card. There was a couple exiled, but he knows what those are too. So he got a chance to see what Arne did what Javier did as far as sideboarding go, and that's what he's looking at before he goes back to figure out his sideboard plan for game 3. It's one of the benefits of milling somebody out is you can see all their cards.
Yep. You can see exactly the game plan that Javier chose to go with and can board it accordingly. It looks like Crippling Fear is coming in here as a one-of.
Giant?
I guess just as a way to sweep the Giants and the Ox, right?
Yeah.
You can just keep all your creatures alive. I mean, the only thing that's bigger is the Lovestruck Beast, right?
Yeah,
I mean, he kills the Mammoth. And did Javier board out Goldspan Dragons? I don't think I saw one. So,
Don't know.
If he doesn't have Goldspan Dragon, that's just an additional card that would have dodged Crippling Fear. So,
all right, game number 3 incoming here. It's early in the day. We've got 2 of our highest ranked players in the field. Arne Huschenbeth on 8-0 against Javier Dominguez on 7-1. And they have treated us to a really great back and forth match here in Standard. This is Dimir Rogues facing off against Temur Adventures. If you're just tuning in, well, we've had 2 great games. Let's hope for another here as Javier decides his game plan. He's got an Edgewall Innkeeper at the ready if he'd like.
yeah, and these mystical disputes, I believe Javier goes up to the full 4 copies. He has at least 3, and so strong in this Rogues matchup. We heard Arne in the interview earlier saying that Andrew Cuneo did not have any mystical disputes, which means, probably a concession or probably just a belief that you're not going to see that many Rogues. And they were right. Only 8% of the field is Rogues. And instead choosing to go for maybe more hard counters instead or cards like Duress. But in this matchup, having that early dispute for a Soaring Thought Thief is extremely important.
Okay, Fabled Passage starting to get the Soaring Thought Thief, the Drown in the Lock turned
Island
on here
is my guess.
for Arne.
Yeah, and if this Soaring Thought Thief gets countered, I mean, we might see a few turns of nothing.
It looks like we're going to see that. Wow, look at that. Right off the top of the library is a Mystical Dispute, giving Arne the ability to fight if he'd like.
Yeah, and I imagine he's probably going to go for it because you typically don't play around double counterspell. But Javier does have exactly double dispute here.
Right.
So
and now he's got a Saw It Coming that just went into the Foretell zone as well. And you can see
he already
Arne,
has it hovering.
He's ahead of the game here, but if
Javier's
Javier
gonna
decides
do it
to
just back.
fight, he can just do it right back to him. Pretty funny.
The thing is, Javier can't really get that punished here. Like if Arne untaps, I mean,
right,
he can just play a rogue, right? So
right. Yeah, this is a key early turns where Into the Story is not online yet for the cheaper mana cost.
Yeah, and it's extremely important that Javier gets that off the battlefield because currently he just doesn't have an answer for it in his hand.
This can be a fairly unimpactful turn here for Huschenbeth, who just pays the cost for Luris, the companion cost, and just passes the turn back after playing a land. Well, Edgewall Innkeeper here. And is it going to just sit all by its lonesome? At least for now it is.
Yeah, he can just wait until Arne chooses to kill it with a removal spell, and then just cast the Brazen Borrower in response. I imagine Javier's just going to do this because, like, the worst case scenario is just the Edgewall Innkeeper dies, but you still got the card out of it.
Right.
So typically in matchups like this, that's exactly what you want to be doing. You never expose Edgewall Innkeeper unless you're going to draw at least one card off of it.
right? Sometimes it lives for multiple turns and it wins the game for you, but in your worst case, it replaces itself. That's certainly a deal that you can take in standard. There we go. Brazen Borrower goes on the stack in response. Heartless Act is going to take out that kind innkeeper, but the card goes into hand here for Dominguez, and he gets to untap with the Borrower, ready to start attacking.
I wonder if Javier's going to run out the Ox this turn, or choose to wait until he can go Ox plus counter backup.
Generally speaking, he tends to play the more patient lines, but as you can see, he's decided it's time to go. Ox of Agonis goes on the stack right now.
I don't think it can get drowned.
It can't. Yeah, he's only got 4 cards in his yard
that's
right
the big
now.
thing.
So this is a very narrow window. You know, even a turn goes by and that can completely change. So Drown in the Loch not going to be able to interact with this Ox just yet.
Oh, no. Yeah, he's one short.
He's one short. He didn't know. So Arne, yikes, he thought he had the 5th card in the graveyard there for Dominguez, but he didn't. And that's why it didn't give him the option. The only option he had was destroy Brazen Borrower, which isn't really what he was interested in. So instead, Ox of Agonis resolves, hits the battlefield, and reloads Javier Dominguez's hand.
And I wonder if that's a signal to Javier, right? Because there was that pause, right?
Well, he also cracked his land.
Yeah, he cracked his land and then said, okay. And then there was a pause. So that might signal to Javier that a Drown in the Loch could very well be in Arne's hand.
Perhaps a bit of an oops there, although I don't know that it would have changed how Arne would have played anyway. And here we have Lurrus into Soaring Thought Thief. So this is similar, Paul, to how you described how people play the Innkeeper. They usually play the Lurrus in a similar way.
Yeah, and here you're going to see a stomp on the Lurrus and an attack here from the Ox. And he could also just go ahead and kill the Soaring Thought Thief. I don't know if that's going to turn on the Into the Story, though.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting question, but we know the Soaring Thought Thief will on its own, whether he kills it or not, right? If that thing gets to turn sideways.
Yeah, so this is just better. You just run out the Bone Crusher Giant. It's like at this point, just put maximum pressure here on Arne, and then still have the Saw It coming here for a potential Into the Story.
Yeah, this works out beautifully here for Dominguez, who's maneuvering through game 3 quite deftly, it must be said, as Arne Huschenbeth has to focus back in here and try to see it. Feels like he has the tools, right? Double Drown in the Loch into the story with a Soaring Thought Thief on the battlefield, but it's not going to be easy. He is facing down 8 power here, and he's at 13 life. That's going to add up very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, he's going to probably have to use these Drown in the Lochs to kill the creatures.
Right.
Right? And not necessarily protect that Into the Story.
Arne deciding to leave Agadim's Awakening in hand.
Wow.
As well.
That's a nice one of. Run a foul here for Javier Dominguez to cleanly deal with the Soaring Thought Thief.
Beautiful. And yeah, as you mentioned, Drown in the Loch is going to have to come out and take out a Bone Crusher. The Bone Crusher tax is very real here as well. Down to 11 goes Arne, and he's still facing down 4 power, attacking him. If Arne wants to use Drown in the Loch on the Ox, fine, right? I don't think Javier will have a problem with that at all.
And Javier fighting here.
Oh, interesting.
Trying to close the game out, and now
he's doubling down.
Arne has to now decide whether or not he needs to preserve his life total here. But now he also has to be really concerned, right? Because Javier has 5 mana available to do whatever he wants.
That's right. And you saw Arne Huschenbeth kind of look to the side like, oh no. Because Javier has recognized that this is his time to apply maximum pressure to the life total of Arne. And he's doing so. He did lose that particular fight, but it did cost 4 damage there coming through, plus the Ox hit for another 4. Down to 7 goes Arne.
Yeah, but fortunately for Arne, Javier is not punishing him here as badly as he could have, right? There's no Henge entering the battlefield. He's actually just putting Obosh into his hand and is probably just going to use this run afoul to deal with the Soaring Thought Thief. I think that's the best case scenario that you could hope for if you're Arne, right? If this happens, all of a sudden now you can go into the story next turn. Oh, and this gives you even more insurance. You're not even concerned about a potential counterspell.
That's right. Not that he was going to not cast into this story here anyway,
right?
But now he can feel good about it. And there's run afoul. So that's going to take out the Saurian Thought Thief, and Arne says, yeah, that's cute, but I am drawing 4 cards here. There's a Ruin Crab. He hasn't been able to get the mill plan online like he did in the first game with the turn 1 Ruin Crab. And he found lands otherwise here, Paul.
Wow.
Not
I think this is just going to be game. He's going to go Ruin Crab into land. And Javier Dominguez currently has enough mana to go Obosh Soulseer and attack for 8 for lethal. And Arne is Arne does not have the mana to cast Mystical Dispute.
No, he has black mana available. That's it. So that's going to be GG. Wow, Javier Dominguez maneuvering through a very tricky matchup here in a drawn-out 3-game match, and he has done so beautifully. Poised to hand Arne Huschenbeth his first loss of the tournament, by the way. Like, so far, Javier's been the only one to crack the code here and actually figure out how to hand Arne a loss. And the perfect run of 8-0 is going to end here as we see Soulseer able to kill the only blocker available. I suppose that Javier has to think about
a Thieves Guild Enforcer.
Thieves Guild Enforcer, is that consideration?
If he does, you have an Ox in your graveyard. You're okay with that, right? And
that's right. And Huschenbeth can only shake his head.
You got to go for it.
Our former world champ, Javier Dominguez, is going to go for it. And with Obosh on the battlefield, that's enough to get the job done. And Javier Dominguez picks up the match and improves to 8-1.